Hey everybody, it's time for another edition of Trips Tips, and this week's tip is this. Pick your poison when you're shooting backlit. I want to show you a photo. This is one of my favorite photos that hangs in our office. It's a grain cart at harvest time. And when we're talking about shooting backlit, we're talking about any time that the key light, in this case the sun, is behind your subject. In this case, this grain cart out in the field at harvest. So, when we've got this backlit situation with the main key light behind our subject, it's usually you achieve the best result when you pick, am I going to expose for the shadows or am I going to expose for the highlights? Okay, so if I expose for the shadows, I'm trying to expose the bull here who is in front of the sunset. If I expose for the highlights, I'm trying to expose the sun without blowing the sun out, and that's going to turn my subject, in this case cows, into a shadow, just a black outline on the screen. And so when we pick one or the other, we usually tend to achieve better results. Now, here's some tips for no matter which way you're going. If you're going to expose for the shadows and you want the subject to show, it's a good idea to hide the light source behind the subject or behind another object. So you can just hide the light behind a leaf or behind an animal and then expose for the dark parts of that animal, and that will make pictures where you have this really light and airy background. But it's not just blown out and white. What you want to watch for is you don't just have blown out and white. So fill that frame with your subject, hide the light behind something else, and you'll end up with some great shots. If you want to expose for the highlights, in this case the sun, and you want these animals to show up as an outline, and I'll tell you this is one of my favorite pictures too, because it's the first really artistic picture that I ever took and blew up big and hung on my wall. It's still in my bedroom. And so this picture kind of catapulted the next 8 years of my career so far because I just like the art of these kind of photos. So I love shooting backlit, and what I've learned since then when it comes to creating these outlines is a lot of times when you're exposing for the highlights, it can still help to hide some of that light, block some of that light behind the animal, and you start to get these really cool rays of light peeking around your subject and coming at the lens. And those photos are extremely interesting as well. When you're shooting backlit, focusing is hard, autofocus is hard, because autofocus won't work on black, right? That's all one. The camera's reading that as solid black. So you need to focus out here on the outlines of the animal somewhere. It also helps to really stop your lens down to make sure these shots are in focus. Now when you're exposing for the shadows and you're trying to bring that animal up, it's not as important. The camera will read that. You just need to get your focus point somewhere where there's some contrast on that animal. So those are some focus tips related to this. Now I do have to tell you something. You can do this another way. Everybody wants to try to get it where you can get the sun and you can get the animals exposed. It is possible. Two things. One, you can shoot in RAW, which means you really have a lot of latitude in your image to bring the highlights down and push the shadows up. When you do that, you want to kind of pick a middle exposure, but I promise you, the more you lean towards saying this shot is about the highlights or this shot is about the shadows, the better those raw images will turn out too. Now, here's the thing. HDR photography, high dynamic range. Our eyes can see a whole lot more dynamic range than a camera can. And that means we can take an image from one place with multiple exposures, and then we can composite that image together. And so we can choose the different areas of the picture that have different exposures. It's completely possible to do that. It's a whole nother technique. It might be more advanced than a lot of you are looking to get into, but I feel responsible to tell you that it can be done. So That's this week's edition of Trips Tips. It's a long one, but it's another one you guys asked for. So keep those questions coming in the comments or hit me up anywhere on social or in my inbox, and I will make sure that we cover these topics that you guys are continuing to ask for. Don't forget, the Complete Guide to Cattle and Livestock Photography is on sale for the entire month of February. It's our best deal of the year. You definitely want to check that out.